The survey ship's silent vigil ghosted through the outer Uit shell of a system the Keth Dominion had catalogued as Sol, a thoroughly unremarkable yellow star with a smattering of rocky planets and gas giants. Science Officer Viren's primary task was resource mapping, a routine operation in a backwater arm of the galaxy. The ship's AI churned through spectral analyses, mineral densities, and atmospheric compositions, flagging anything that might justify a harvesting expedition. It flagged nothing until Viren trained the deep core imager on the third planet. The data feed flickered, recalibrated, and delivered a reading that made Viren's manipulator tendrils freeze over the console. The planet's core was not molten nickel iron. It was structured. Layers of what should have been liquid metal were arranged in concentric shells of impossible regularity. Buried beneath the crust, branching out like a frozen nervous system, were conduits of a material that reflected neutrinos in ways no natural substance could. "Admiral Threx," Viren said, modulating his voice synthesizer to the urgent frequency, "you need to see this." Threx, a massive Keth with carapace plates etched with command sigils, lumbered over. His 4 ocular sensors narrowed at the display. "What is that? A sensor ghost?" "Negative. I've run calibration 7 times. The planet Terra 3 is artificially structured from its inner mantle to the liquid outer core. The energy signature is dormant, but it's there. A standby mode, I think." "Standby for what?" Threx's voice carried the weight of suspicion. Viren overlaid the readings with the ship's historical database, a repository of data traded from 100 species. There was no match, but the algorithm spat out a probability correlation with one entry: Shaper Remnant, a classification reserved for artifacts of a progenitor race that had vanished before most star systems had formed planets. The Dominion's highest science councils had speculated the Shapers had built weapons of planetary scale, but no intact specimen had ever been found. Until now. "This is a Shaper construct," Viren said, his vocalizer barely above a whisper. "A weapon, and it's on a populated world." The ship's external sensors showed the blue and green sphere spinning peacefully in its orbit, crawling with the electromagnetic chatter of a primitive species. Nuclear fission signatures, radio waves, orbital debris, all signs of a civilization on the cusp of spaceflight. Threx studied the readouts, calculating the implications. A Shaper weapon in the hands of barely sentient bipeds was a catastrophe waiting to happen. The Dominion's protocols for such a find were clear: secure the artifact, neutralize any potential inheritors. "Move us into geosync above the northern hemisphere," Threx ordered. "Prepare a full stealth insertion. I want a geological sample from one of those conduits." The silent vigil slid inward, its phase shroud bending electromagnetic radiation around it. On the surface, nothing changed. In the satellite networks and ground-based observatories, the sudden occlusion of a star field was logged as an anomaly, filed away by astronomers for later review. One of those astronomers, a postdoc in the Chilean Andes, sent an alert that an object of considerable mass had just passed Jupiter and was decelerating fast. The message reached the United Nations Space Command, just as the silent vigil achieved its position. Viren prepared the coring drone. It would plunge through the atmosphere, phase shift into the crust, and extract a sample of the conduit material before returning. The calculations were perfect. The drone launched, a needle of shadow that streaked toward the Atlantic Ocean floor where the nearest conduit branch lay. It never reached the water. 16 kilometers from the surface, the planet emitted a low-frequency pulse, not a sound, not an electromagnetic wave, but a compression in the fabric of spacetime itself. The silent vigil's phase shroud collapsed like torn silk. Alarms screamed. Threx stumbled as artificial gravity flickered. Viren watched the drone's telemetry dissolve into a static hiss. On the ship's main viewer, the planet remained serene, but now every sensor array on board was lighting up with the same impossible reading. The core had shifted. The dormant architecture was no longer dormant. Energy was flowing through those conduits, converging toward the surface in a vast, coordinated pattern. Viren looked at the Admiral, all four eyes wide. It woke up. Lena Osei was alone in the seismic monitoring station on the rim of the Afar Depression when the planet started talking to her. She had spent 17 months deploying a network of ultrasensitive geophones across the Rift Valley, hopping to map the deep magmatic plumbing that fed the region's volcanoes. The data came in torrents, terabytes of seismic noise that required weeks of filtering. Lately, she had noticed patterns that didn't fit, rhythmic microtremors, almost harmonic, repeating on timescales too long to be geological accident. That afternoon, she ran the latest batch through a custom neural network designed to spot signals in chaos. The screen blossomed with a lattice of intersecting lines, a three-dimensional web that mirrored itself across all depths. It looked like a circuit diagram. It looked like a brain. She called her liaison at the Pentagon, a brusque Marine Corps officer named Commander Rojas, who had been assigned after her work got flagged by a DARPA algorithm. Rojas listened to her frantic explanation over a crackling secured channel. "You're telling me the Earth has a nervous system," Rojas said, voice flat. "I'm telling you the Earth is built. The pattern is too precise, too persistent. Someone or something placed these structures under the crust and they're activating." There was a long pause. "Dr. Osei, there's a situation developing. Look at the sky." She stepped outside into the Ethiopian dusk and saw them. Points of light, too many to be satellites, moving in formation. Some were large enough to reflect the last sunlight, revealing angular silhouettes that no human engineering had produced. Her stomach dropped. "They're here," Rojas said. "UN Space Command lost contact with Luna Base an hour ago. We're tracking at least 40 objects in orbit. They're not broadcasting, not responding to hails. Then we got your report. The brass wants you in a chopper to Djibouti within the hour. We're consolidating at the Joint Response Center." Lena's throat tightened. "You knew, didn't you? You knew something was down there." "We knew there were anomalies. Deep time echoes, gravitational lensing effects. Nothing as clear as what you found. But now I think we've been sitting on a bomb since before we crawled out of the trees." The ground shuddered. Not a violent shake, but a deep rolling thrum that Lena felt in her marrow. The seismic monitors screamed, their needles spiking into red zones. On her tablet, the lattice pattern was pulsing. A wave of pressure, like a sound too low to hear, rolled up from the rift floor and passed through her. And then the voice came. It was not a voice. It was a translation of something vast and old into human neural code, a cascade of meaning that bypassed language entirely. Lena stood frozen, gripping the doorframe, as the message unfolded inside her skull. "Inheritors, the threat returns. The shroud approaches. The weapon was built for this hour. Will you accept the burden?" She knew, instantly and completely, what it meant. She knew about the Shapers, an ancient species that had fought a war against a parasitic intelligence that consumed stars. She knew Earth was their last, desperate gamble, a weapon hidden in plain sight, seeded with a species designed to one day operate it. She knew the aliens in orbit were not the Shroud, but a panicked interloper whose arrival had triggered the awakening early. And she knew that the planet could destroy them all if it decided humanity was not ready. The voice faded, leaving a ringing silence. Lena found herself on her knees, tears streaming down her face, not from fear but from the overwhelming weight of 1 billion years of memory. She scrambled for the radio. "Rojas," she gasped, "tell the UN, don't attack them, don't provoke the planet. It's alive, and it's waiting for us to make a choice." Threx watched the tactical hollow fill with the angry red icons of his armada. 47 warships had translated into the system, a vanguard of the Keth Dominion's outer fleet, summoned by his priority alert. The high clarity had granted him full engagement authority. The Shaper weapon on the surface of Terra 3 was too dangerous to exist. especially in the hands of a pre-FTL species that might accidentally trigger it. He broadcast the ultimatum across all human communication networks, his voice synthesized into their major linguistic groups. Inhabitants of the planet designated Terra 3, you are harboring a forbidden artifact of galactic scale. Surrender your world to Keth Dominion stewardship within 3 planetary rotations or face enforced pacification. There will be no negotiation. The response was chaos. Some human factions fired primitive nuclear missiles at his ships, which were swatted aside by point defense lasers. Others pleaded for dialogue. Threx ignored them all. He had a clear directive: neutralize the weapon and, if necessary, the planet's biosphere to prevent activation. He ordered a kinetic harvester to launch. A dense tungsten rod accelerated to a fraction of light speed, aimed at a deep fault line beneath the ocean. The impact would punch through the crust and expose the conduit network for direct bombardment. The harvester fell. Viren, manning the sensors, saw the counterstrike before it happened. The planet's energy grid flared, a momentary spike that formed a localized gravity shear directly in the harvester's path. The rod did not impact. It was swallowed by a pocket of warped spacetime, spun around some unfathomable loop, and spat back out along the same trajectory. 3 Keth destroyers, caught in tight formation, were struck before their shields could reconfigure. They shattered, spewing debris and atmosphere. Threx bellowed with rage and disbelief. How? That species has no shielding technology, no energy weapons. They are nothing. The planet is defending them, Viren said, his manipulators trembling over the console. Sir, the energy patterns are fully active now. The crust is reconfiguring. I'm reading massive tectonic shifts. Land masses are moving. On the view screen, the planet's oceans were boiling in patches as colossal structures, curved and smooth like fused obsidian, rose from the depths. They were not weapons yet, but they had the look of emplacements, of launch rails and focusing apertures. The planet was arming itself. And then, without warning, every human on the planet's surface simultaneously lost consciousness. Threx saw it through orbital surveillance, billions of bipedal forms collapsing where they stood, vehicles veering off roads, aircraft gliding into catastrophic stalls. The planet-wide neural event lasted only 13 seconds, but when the humans awoke, something had changed. Their chaotic electromagnetic chatter coalesced into a single, planet-spanning signal, a harmonic pattern that beat like a heart. Viren translated the signal's modulation. It's a message, a single message repeating, inheritors accepted. Threx felt a chill that his carapace could not insulate against. The weapon was no longer dormant, and it had chosen its operators. The humans were inside it now, merged with it. He had not neutralized a threat. He had created one beyond any measure. All ships fall back to lunar orbit, he ordered. Deploy the resonance dampeners. Prepare for full orbital sterilization. We will burn the planet down to its mantle if necessary. But even as he spoke, the spires rising from the oceans began to glow with an inner light that his sensors could not identify. And a new voice, layered with billions of human timbres, blared across every Keth comm channel. Admiral Threx of the Keth Dominion, we are Terra and we do not wish to fight you, but we will not yield. The true enemy comes. You have one chance to stand with us. We strongly advise you take it. Threx stared at the screen. A species that moments ago had been a squabbling, fractured race of primitives was now speaking with one planetary voice. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. And he still had no idea what the shroud was, but the terror in that unified voice was unmistakable. Something far worse was coming. Lena opened her eyes to a cathedral of metal and stone buried beneath the Great Rift Valley. The chamber was vast, its walls lined with surfaces that flowed and shifted between solid and liquid, etched with glyphs that seemed to rearrange themselves as she looked. Commander Rojas stood beside her, his hand gripping his sidearm, though he had not drawn it. They had been drawn here, pulled through the earth by a gentle, irresistible current of displaced rock, deposited in this nexus. The root, the name Lena had given the planetary intelligence, manifested as a column of shifting geometries, a presence that spoke not in words but in direct cognitive impression. It showed them the Shapers, a species of long, filamentous beings that had evolved in the accretion disk of a dying star, learning to weave the fabric of space-time itself. They had created life on 1,000 worlds, seeding biospheres with potential. And they had built the weapon called Earth as a last-ditch defense against an enemy that consumed not just planets, but the very laws of physics that sustained life. The shroud the root conveyed was a manifold of quantum filaments, a hive consciousness that existed as a state of corrupted space-time. It drifted across the galaxy, drawn to complex energy patterns. When it found a civilization, it overwrote the local reality, assimilating all matter and consciousness into its twisted architecture. Worlds it touched became gray, silent tombs where time itself degraded. The Shapers had fought it for millions of years, losing gradually. In their final act, they sacrificed their entire civilization to forge a weapon that could force the shroud into a stable, vulnerable configuration, and then annihilate it. They needed a trigger species, a race that could harmonize with the weapon's resonance and aim it. So they engineered Earth's biosphere to produce humanity, a species of chaotic creativity, capable of both immense destruction and stubborn compassion. The weapon would only respond to a species that could encompass both extremes. Lena absorbed this torrent of information, her mind reeling but her heart strangely calm. Rojas's voice broke the silence. Why didn't they just wake it up themselves? Why wait billions of years? The root's reply was heavy with sorrow. The Shapers had been too close to extinction. Their own consciousness had become too ordered, too rigid to interface with the weapon's chaotic core. They could only build it, then die, trusting that the biosphere they had designed would one day produce a species of worthy inheritors. "And if we fail?" Lena asked. The chamber dimmed. The root showed her a final failsafe. If the shroud arrived and the weapon was not activated, Earth's core would collapse into a compressed singularity, swallowing the planet and everything within a light-second radius. The Shapers would rather destroy their greatest creation than let it fall into the shroud's grip. Outside, the Keth dampeners were beginning to whine, frequencies designed to disrupt planetary energy fields. The root's projections flickered. The weapon was only partially activated. A full awakening required a harmonic consensus, not just the assent of two humans in a cave, but a collective choice by humanity as a whole. The global syncope had been a first step, a moment of shared vision. Now humanity had to decide, consciously, to accept the burden. Lena looked at Rojas. "We need to get a message to the world, a real one, not just a psychic flash. People need to know what's at stake." Rojas nodded. "The UN has the emergency alert system still functional. If we can patch into the root's transmission, we could broadcast our experience." The root pulsed assent. The stone walls shimmered, and a direct neural interface extruded before them, a cradle of living metal ready to link their minds to the planet's voice. As they stepped toward it, the entire chamber shuddered. A Keth resonance dampener had struck, drilling into the crust mere kilometers away. The root's projection fractured with pain. "They're punching through," Rojas said. Lena grabbed the interface, feeling its cool surface meld with her palms. "Then we don't have much time. Let's talk to our species." The interface did not simply amplify Lena's voice. It plunged her and Rojas into a shared mindscape, a simulation built from the root's stored memories of human history. They stood together on a plain of gray stone, surrounded by towering monoliths that flickered with scenes of war, famine, invention, and art. The trial, they understood, was not a test of strength or intellect. It was a calibration. The weapon needed to know if humanity's chaotic spectrum could be focused without breaking, so it forced them to relive the extremes. Lena found herself inside the body of a mother during a siege, holding a child as the walls crumbled. She felt the terror, the helpless rage, the fierce love that drove the woman to shield her child with her own flesh. She drowned in the memory of a soldier, Rojas's memory, she realized, who had to choose between following a terrible order and saving a civilian. The shame and the defiance burned through her nerves. Rojas, in turn, experienced Lena's grandmother's flight from a genocide, the long march through a desert, the taste of sand and bitter water. He staggered under the weight of it, gasping for breath, but he did not let go. They shared more acts of quiet mercy, a teacher who spent her life educating outcast children, a firefighter who ran into a collapsing building, a dictator who repented too late. The montage was brutal, relentless, and impossibly intimate. At the center of the mindscape, the root waited, a silent observer. It did not judge the darkness, it waited against the light. Humanity had a capacity for cruelty that rivaled the Shroud's indifference, but it also had an instinct for self-sacrifice that the Shapers had found breathtaking. The weapon would only function if both potentials were acknowledged and balanced. Rojas broke first. A memory of his own, a comrade he had lost in a needless firefight, crashed over him and he fell to his knees, roaring with grief. Lena knelt beside him, gripping his shoulders. "I see it," she whispered. "I see him, he's here with us. All of it matters, Rojas, all of it goes into the weapon, even the pain." He looked up at her and something in his eyes shifted, acceptance, not surrender. The monoliths around them blazed with a shared light. The Root's voice filled the mindscape. "You are flawed, but so were the Shapers. You are capable of annihilation, but also of mercy beyond calculation. The weapon recognizes its reflection in you. It is yours." The mindscape dissolved. Lena and Rojas were back in the Nexus, gasping, their bodies slick with sweat. The chamber was vibrating with energy. The Root's geometric form had expanded, filling the space with a warm, pulsing glow. Above them, the Keth Armada intensified its bombardment. But the spires in the oceans were now fully risen, and from their tips, beams of structured light lanced into the sky, intercepting the dampeners and turning them to vapor. The planet's crust groaned as massive launch rails, hidden for eons beneath mountain ranges, rotated into firing positions. The continents themselves were shifting, but not to cause destruction. They were aligning with an ancient grid, completing the weapon's configuration. Lena felt the link deepen. She could perceive the Keth ships as if they were insects buzzing around her skin. She could sense the deep space sensor net, an array of Shaper satellites that had been dormant beyond Pluto's orbit, now waking and scanning the dark. And she felt the Shroud, a vast, cold pressure at the edge of the system, its arrival imminent. The Root broadcast the memory of the Shroud's consumption to every Keth channel, raw and unfiltered. Lena saw Threx's flagship receive it. She felt the moment his certainty fractured. Now the real test would begin. Not of humanity, but of the Keth. Would they join the planet that had disarmed their barrage with contemptuous ease, or would they die defending their pride? On the Keth flagship Dominion's edge, Admiral Threx watched the deconstruction of his third resonance dampener. The planetary counterfire was surgically precise. Not a single human city had been scratched by falling debris, though a Keth destroyer had been neatly bisected when it strayed too close to a launch rail. Then the transmission came. The Root's memory of the Shroud unfolded in the command deck's holotank, worlds turning gray, populations screaming into silence, the stars themselves dimming as the parasite rewrote their fusion cores into cold, dead spheres. Threx saw Keth colonies, future Keth colonies maybe, consumed in moments. He saw the Shapers' desperate, doomed charges. He saw Earth's forging in a crucible of dying galaxies. And over it all, the unified voice of humanity spoke with calm authority. "Admiral Threx, we have disabled 17 of your ships without a single Keth life lost. We could annihilate your entire armada with a thought. We choose not to. The Shroud is hours from entering our system. We will face it. Will you stand with us?" Threx's carapace plates rattled with an emotion his species rarely acknowledged: humility. He had attacked a sleeping giant and the giant had not squashed him. It had offered him a hand. Viren, who had been silent for long moments, turned from his station. "Sir, the high clarity has gone silent. Our reinforcements are 3 days out, but the planetary defense grid is magnificent. If we integrate our remaining weapons with theirs, we could form a dual-front engagement." Threx opened a channel to the remaining loyalist captains. "All Keth vessels, this is Admiral Threx. By my authority, we are suspending the pacification protocol and declaring a temporary alliance with Terra. Assume formation Sigma-4 and slave your targeting to the planetary command net. Today, we fight a common enemy." The response was a ragged chorus of assent. Some ships broke and fled, but 23 remained, forming a defensive crescent around Earth's orbital plane. Threx felt the Shaper weapons targeting Matrix brush against his ship systems, asking permission, then integrating with an elegance that made Keth technology feel like flint knives. On the surface, Lena and Rojas stood in a communication hub hastily set up in the Afar Desert, surrounded by UN officers and scientists. The global human population, still reeling from the psychic visions, was being shepherded into shelters. But a strange calm had settled. The vision of the shroud had been terrifying, but the presence of the root was comforting, a maternal hum in the back of every mind. Lena looked at the tactical display showing the approaching shroud, a wave of spatial distortion that ate light. The Keth fleet, now painted green as friendly, was repositioning. She took a deep breath and reached through the interface to the planet's core. "Root, we are ready. What's the firing plan?" The answer was a cascade of data, a beam of structured spacetime, a weapon that would impose a temporary stable physics upon the shroud, forcing it into a finite form. Once material, its nodes could be targeted with conventional and Shaper-enhanced weapons. The catch was that the beam required an organic targeting partner, a human mind or minds, to guide it. The Shapers had designed it so that only a living consciousness could make the split-second decisions needed to track the shroud's chaotic movements. Lena knew that would be her. She felt Rojas's hand on her shoulder. "I'll handle ground coordination. You take the shot." "I'm a geophysicist," she whispered. "I study rocks." "You're a human, and that's exactly what the Shapers wanted." She smiled, a fragile thing, and closed her eyes. The root's power flowed into her, and the sky seemed to open. She could feel the Keth crews, their disciplined terror. She could feel the shroud's cold, hungry approach. And she aimed the greatest weapon in the galaxy. The shroud breached the heliopause as a tide of unreality. Stars visible through its leading edge distorted, their light stretching into impossible colors. The combined human-Keth fleet opened fire with everything it had, but kinetic rounds and plasma lances passed through the shroud without effect, their matter unraveled by the corrupted physics. Lena, her consciousness floating at the apex of the root's sensor web, saw the true shape of the enemy. It was a shifting constellation of filaments, each a microscopic wormhole that connected to an extra-dimensional reservoir of entropic energy. To destroy it, she had to force it into a single, coherent structure, a temporary body. The root fired. A column of structured light, thicker than a continent, erupted from the Earth's core, passing harmlessly through the crust and atmosphere, then spearing into space. The beam was not energy in any conventional sense. It was a projection of ordered reality, a bubble of physical law imposed on the shroud's chaos. Where it struck, the shroud's filaments shrieked in frequencies that rattled the Keth ships' hulls and gave human sensors catastrophic feedback. But the shroud condensed. The writhing mass collapsed into a core node, a sphere of dark matter wrapped in a lattice of visible strands. It was vast, roughly the diameter of Jupiter, and it radiated a malevolent awareness. For the first time in its eons of consumption, the shroud was being forced to play by the enemy's rules. Lena targeted the node and spoke to the combined fleet. "All ships, concentrate fire on the blue-shifted region. That's its brain. Take it out and the filaments dissolve." Threx's voice thundered in response. Keth Vanguard, execute Fire Plan Auric. Protect the planetary beam at all costs. The battle became a symphony of light. Keth destroyers looped around the shroud's flailing filaments, absorbing hits that would have turned them to mist if the root hadn't extended its shielding around them. Human-crewed shuttles, retrofitted with Shaper energy siphons, darted in and out, leeching power from the shroud's periphery. Rojas coordinated the ground-based sensor network, feeding Lena real-time data on the shroud's resonance fluctuations. The shroud adapted. It began projecting counterpulses, trying to overwhelm the root's ordering beam with waves of entropy. Lena felt the strain as the planet's core temperature spiked. The root's voice, ever calm, warned that the weapon could not maintain the beam indefinitely. They had minutes. Threx saw the risk. His flagship, the Dominion's Edge, was already damaged, its shields flickering. But it was the only ship with a hull-breaching torpedo that could punch into the shroud's core once it was weakened. He gave the order for all crew to evacuate, then set the autopilot on a collision course. Viren's voice cracked over the comm. "Admiral, you cannot. I brought this war to a planet that wanted only to be left alone," Threx said, his tone strangely peaceful. "Let me finish it." The Dominion's Edge accelerated, its engines overloading. It rammed into the shroud's core node just as Lena's beam created a momentary gap in the filaments. The torpedo detonated inside, a shaped eruption of antimatter that tore the node apart from within. The shroud convulsed. The filaments snapped, one by one, each releasing a burst of stored starlight as they died. Without the node to sustain the wormhole network, the extra-dimensional reservoir collapsed, sealing the shroud's consciousness into a rapidly shrinking singularity. The root reached out with a gravity tether, catching the singularity and drawing it into orbit around Earth, a new, dark moon that would serve as a permanent prison. The battle was over. The Keth fleet, battered but alive, limped into higher orbit. On the surface, humans emerged from shelters to a sky filled with silent, alien ships and a planet that no longer felt like just a planet. Lena severed her direct link, her body trembling with exhaustion but her spirit soaring. She found Rojas on a ridge overlooking the transformed landscape. The spires had sunk back into the earth, the launch rails retracted, but the memory of their emergence was etched into every witness's mind. Rojas offered her a canteen. "Well, Doc, we're the caretakers of a superweapon. What now?" Lena took a long drink. "Now we make sure we never have to use it again. The root says it will stay dormant, but it'll teach us what we need to know. The Shapers didn't just leave us a weapon, they left us a library, a guide. We can join the galaxy, not as conquerors, but as guardians." The unified human voice that had spoken to Threx was gone, replaced by the familiar chaos of billions of individual minds. But underneath the chatter, there was a new frequency, a quiet hum of connection that would never fade. Humanity had been forged by Earth, and now Earth had been forged by humanity. A few kilometers away, a Keth shuttle landed, carrying Viren and a delegation of survivors. They had come to negotiate, to offer reparations, to learn from the species that had shown them mercy when annihilation was the easier choice. Lena turned to greet them, her heart open. The root's final whisper brushed against her thoughts. "You were never just a planet." Lena looked at Rojas, at the desert, at the sky where a dark moon now hung as a reminder. "Neither were we.